Welcome, Watchers of Illusion, to the Castle of Confusion. Phase with us now, for this is the time of me talking about Knightmare on the Commodore 64.
RetroKork.
Knightmare. In case you were unaware, from 1987 until the year 1994, Anglia Television produced, a very, very innovative children's game show as it was touted. And it was unlike any show I'd seen before, or since, if you ask me. After seeing some games for the Spectrum ZX, including Tick Attack and Dragon Torque, Tim Child decided that a television studio should be able to revolutionize the genre by, for example, putting the player directly into the game, making him his own avatar. Yes, it hadn't been done before, and he was trying to do what is basically known nowadays as virtual reality. The technology, however, was not really up to it. For Knightmare, he had to rely on what is known as a chroma key studio, which basically means that you can do green screen in it, even though the wall might be blue. And he had to use pre-rendered, pre-drawn artwork, at least in the beginning, which they then combined with live-action puppets and actors, who would be what is nowadays called a non-player character in video games. The show was hosted by Hugo Myatt, who portrayed the knight and dungeon master Dragard. A dungeon master because he managed to master the so-called Dungeon of Deceit, an ever-changing labyrinth with dead ends and, deadly traps. The player was usually a child, but in one remake that was done for Geek Week for YouTube, the player was actually a fully grown man from Norwich. Wait a second. Just looking at my script, they filmed the original show in Norwich, and Ashens had to be a part of the remake when he lived in town. They could have used him way earlier. Oh well. The player, who only has one chance at beating the dungeon, making it through the 3 levels of riddles, traps, and trickery, not to mention the characters you could encounter within the walls of the dungeon. The player was given virtually no field of vision, thanks to the so-called Helmet of Justice, which in the first season had a very low budget and handmade feel to it, looking a bit like a plastic bucket covered in paper mache. The player was guided by 3 people of his or her choosing. They would see the scene as intended unless there was a hiccup, a technical glitch, and they would guide the player, who would mostly see a blue room if the helmet were taken off, or until the game was over, which would mean they would all stand without any helmet, anything restricting their vision, standing in the blue screen studio. Now, the show was extremely innovative in its use of digital animation and the technology we all know as green screen, and it lasted 8 seasons, or as the Brits call it, series, before being canned because of shifting audiences and a perceived reduced need for, role-playing game shows for them kidsies. But enough about the show. I'm already in the lower third, actually, of the first page of the script here. And I still haven't talked about the games. Yeah, there were 2 games released under the name of Knightmare, both by Activision. One is an adventure slash role-playing game, and the other one, it's a shooter. It's a walk-around shooter. The shooter is pretty much completely unrelated to the show, besides bearing the Knightmare name, though it wears it with an exclamation mark. So let's deal with the shooting game first, so then I can talk about the real Knightmare game. The shooter Knightmare, with an exclamation mark at the end, is not very good. You play a knight on his journey to apparently gather items in a castle. You shoot with fire. You move around with the joystick in port 2 and try to gather 7 items in the trophy room. It also plays in dead silence, besides a few rather basic sound effects. But hey, better than nothing, I think. And now, it's time for the adventure role-playing game by the name of Knightmare, with a license to the content of the show. After all, I'm almost on page 2 here. The first thing you'll notice is that it has intro music, but unfortunately it's not the show's theme. So purists will be a bit disappointed. This game also includes Life Force, which in the show first was represented by a head in a helmet, then by a walking knight in armor who turns into a skeleton and crumbles if you die, and ultimately it was a pie with slices disappearing. Here in this game it is represented by a candle. However, you do not carry a knapsack in which you can store food to regain life force, so you're under time constraints as well. And every hit upon your avatar means you have less life force, less time to complete the quest, which is to get out of Demonia Castle. You can move around using the joystick or some keys on the keyboard. The interface, which has a verb-noun structure, it uses a bunch of preset verbs and items through which you can scroll with the shift key. Items include characters such as your 2 oracles, pretty much an attempt to kind of mimic the advisors from the TV show who sit back in the antechamber. However, unlike the TV show, you can only ask 1 oracle in any given situation, and one of them has your death as its goal. Now, which one it is, I do not really know myself. However, I find the game tedious, as I have an issue with escaping the guards who roam the castle, because you are not armed. But in the 3rd room you already run into guards, so you're pretty much doomed to early deaths over and over, even if you have a walkthrough. Now, the game only has a limited amount of questions. It can ask, do you have a war monster? And ultimately some rooms seem to be optional, so the experience is pretty much kinda lacking. Now, in the Zap magazine, February 1988, the game got an overall score of 88%, but the game only cost 10 quid, £10, and the individual reviews bemoan the high difficulty of the questions you will end up being asked, unless, like me, you constantly die in room 3, and the somewhat lacklusterly animated sprites, which seem to be shuffling in a rather awkward manner than walking around on the dungeon floors. And the final bit, the climactic battle, it feels weird, as you need to do things that seem counterintuitive at first. So yeah, Knightmare on the Commodore 64. It doesn't make me go all, ooh, nasty. But Okay. I mean, it's not the worst use of a license, but the framing device of the book and the lack of interaction with NPCs. Witty banter would have been a reason to feel as if the game properly reflected the show. Without it, yeah. Well, these things, they could have been improved upon. Vastly improved upon, if you ask me. That has been the video on Knightmare. And keep telling yourself, it's only a game, isn't it? Well, of course it is. Okay, in 2 weeks, we're pretty much headed for Halloween, so I think I might even put on a hockey mask and discuss the Commodore 64 version of Friday the 13th.